She's browsing, maybe picking out a new fantasy novel or a mystery she's been dying to read. The bell above the door jingles as she enters, and the comforting scent of paper and ink fills the air. But then, she disappears. No one sees her leave. No one hears a thing. Her parents wait, thinking she's just lost track of time, but hours pass, and then days. The police are called, and a search ensues, but there's no trace of her. No footprints, no witnesses, no sign of struggle. Just a gaping hole in the fabric of the community. This isn't just a missing person case, it's a mystery that shakes the very foundation of what we believe is safe and normal. And then, just when it seems like all hope is lost, a discovery is made. Hidden within the walls of the bookstore, behind layers of drywall and insulation, security footage is found, footage that no one knew existed. This footage doesn't just show the girl entering the store, it reveals something far more chilling. Something that will make you question everything you thought you knew about this case. But what does it show? Who is behind this? And why was it hidden away for so long? These are the questions that have haunted investigators and the community alike. And in this podcast, we're going to uncover the truth. We'll delve into the footage, speak to experts, and hear from those closest to the case. You'll hear first-hand accounts, see the evidence, and come to your own conclusions. But be warned, the truth is darker than you might imagine. So, if you're ready to uncover the secrets that have been lurking in the shadows, join us. This is a story you won't forget. The girl's name was Emily Carter, a 16-year-old high school junior with a passion for literature and a quiet demeanor that often led her to be overlooked in the bustling halls of her suburban high school. She had been a regular at the local bookstore, Whispers of the Past, a cozy, dimly lit shop nestled between a coffeehouse and a florist on Maple Street. The store was her sanctuary, a place where she could lose herself in the pages of classic novels and contemporary mysteries. Her parents, Sarah and Tom Carter, had always known about her fondness for reading, but they never imagined it would lead her into the heart of a mystery that would captivate the entire town. On the afternoon of her disappearance, Emily had left home with a list of books she intended to purchase for her upcoming English project. She kissed her mother goodbye, promising to return before dinner. That was the last time anyone saw her. Hours passed, and when she hadn't returned, her parents grew concerned. They checked with friends, classmates, and even the bookstore, but no one had seen her since she entered the shop. The police were alerted, and a search was launched, but there were no leads, no witnesses, and no sign of Emily. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew colder. The community rallied together, organizing search parties and distributing flyers, but Emily remained missing. Then, just when hope seemed lost, a construction crew working on renovations to Whispers of the Past made a startling discovery. Hidden behind a false wall in the back of the store, they found a small, dusty room. Inside, a collection of old security tapes, some dated back decades, were stacked in a forgotten corner. Among them was a tape labeled Emily Carter, the 5th of December, 2024. The footage was grainy and time-worn, but it clearly showed Emily entering the store that fateful afternoon. She was alone, her face alight with the excitement of finding the books she had been searching for. But what happened after that was not captured on the tape. The discovery of the tape sent shockwaves through the community. How had it ended up behind a wall? Why had it been hidden for so long? And most importantly, what had happened to Emily? The police reviewed the footage repeatedly, but it offered no answers. It was as if the tape was a clue without a solution, a piece of a puzzle that didn't fit anywhere. As the investigation stalled, a local podcast, Unsolved Mysteries of Maple Street, picked up the story. The hosts, investigative journalists with a knack for uncovering hidden truths, began to delve into Emily's life. They interviewed her friends, teachers, and anyone who might have had insight into her world. What they uncovered was a tapestry of secrets and lies, of relationships that weren't as they seemed and events that didn't add up. One of Emily's closest friends, Laura, revealed that Emily had been acting strangely in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. She had become withdrawn, spending more time alone and less time with her usual group of friends. Laura also mentioned that Emily had been researching the history of Whispers of the Past, particularly its original owner, a reclusive man named Victor Blackwood, who had mysteriously disappeared decades ago. Emily had even found an old diary belonging to Blackwood, filled with cryptic entries about hidden rooms and secret passages within the bookstore. The podcast hosts also uncovered that the current owner of the bookstore, Mr. Harold Finch, had a criminal record that he had kept hidden from the public. He had been arrested years ago for embezzlement but had managed to keep his past under wraps. Interviews with former employees revealed that Finch had been acting erratically in the months before Emily's disappearance, often speaking about the need to protect the secrets of the store. As the podcast episodes aired, listeners began to piece together a chilling narrative. Emily had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have, something that someone was willing to go to great lengths to keep hidden. The security tape, it seemed, was not just a recording of her last known moments, it was a warning. A warning that there were things in whispers of the past that were better left undisturbed. The investigation took a darker turn when the podcast hosts received an anonymous tip. The tipster claimed that Emily had discovered a hidden compartment within the bookstore, a compartment that contained evidence of illegal activities tied to the store's history. The tipster also mentioned that Emily had planned to meet someone the night she disappeared to hand over the information she had found. But that meeting never took place. The more the podcast uncovered, the more questions arose. Who was the anonymous tipster? Was Emily's disappearance connected to the bookstore's dark past? And what was Mr. Finch hiding? The answers seemed just out of reach, tantalizingly close yet frustratingly elusive. As the story gained national attention, the pressure mounted on the local authorities to solve the case. The podcast hosts, now deeply involved in the investigation, received threats warning them to stop digging. But they pressed on, determined to uncover the truth. Then, a breakthrough came. A former employee of the bookstore came forward with a shocking revelation. They had witnessed a confrontation between Emily and Mr. Finch the night she disappeared. According to the employee, Emily had accused Finch of being involved in illegal activities and had threatened to expose him. The confrontation had turned heated, and the employee had left before things escalated further. With this new information, the police reopened the case with renewed vigor. They conducted a thorough search of the bookstore, uncovering hidden rooms and compartments that had been sealed off for years. In one of these rooms, they found a collection of old documents and photographs that linked Mr. Finch to a series of unsolved crimes dating back decades. The investigation revealed that Mr. Finch had been using the bookstore as a front for his illicit activities, including smuggling and money laundering. Emily had inadvertently uncovered his operation and had become a threat to his empire. In a desperate bid to protect himself, Finch had silenced her, hiding the evidence of her disappearance behind the false wall and the security tape. The case of Emily Carter's disappearance was finally solved, but the revelations left the community shaken. Whispers of the Past was no longer just a quaint bookstore, it was a symbol of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of even the most unassuming places. The podcast, Unsolved Mysteries of Maple Street, had not only uncovered the truth about Emily's fate but had also exposed the hidden underbelly of their town. As the final episode aired, the hosts reflected on the journey they had undertaken. They had started with a simple story of a missing girl and had uncovered a complex web of deceit and corruption. The case had changed them, just as it had changed the town. And as they signed off, they left their listeners with a final thought: sometimes, the past isn't just behind us. Sometimes, it's buried beneath our feet, waiting to be uncovered. The deeper the podcast team dug into Emily Carter's disappearance, the more the shadows seemed to close in around them. What had begun as a straightforward investigation into a missing teenager had transformed into a labyrinth of secrets, lies, and unexpected dangers. The discovery of the hidden security tape had been a breakthrough, but it also opened a Pandora's box of complications that no one had anticipated. One of the first unsettling signs came when the podcast hosts attempted to access the bookstore's archives. The records, which had been meticulously kept, were now mysteriously missing. The shelves that once held decades of documents were bare, and the staff claimed to have no knowledge of their whereabouts. It was as if the past had been erased overnight. The hosts were left with more questions than answers. Who would want to erase the history of a small-town bookstore? And why? As they continued their investigation, they received a cryptic message from an anonymous source. The message contained a single line: "The walls have ears." At first, it seemed like a harmless warning, perhaps a metaphor for the dangers of digging too deep. But as the hosts pondered its meaning, they realized it could be a literal statement. Could there be more hidden cameras in the bookstore? Were they being watched as they uncovered the truth? Determined to find out, the team returned to Whispers of the Past under the cover of darkness. Armed with flashlights and recording equipment, they scoured the building for any signs of surveillance. In the basement, they discovered a hidden compartment behind a stack of old crates. Inside, they found a collection of surveillance equipment, cameras, microphones, and monitors, all connected to a central system. It was clear that someone had been monitoring the bookstore for years. But who? And why? The discovery sent shockwaves through the team. They had uncovered a network of surveillance that spanned the entire bookstore. The implications were staggering. Had Emily been watched before her disappearance? Had she stumbled upon something she shouldn't have? The questions piled up, but the answers remained elusive. As the investigation progressed, the team faced increasing resistance. Their equipment was tampered with, their files were deleted, and they received threatening messages warning them to stop digging. It became clear that someone was desperate to keep the truth hidden. But who had the power and resources to orchestrate such a campaign of intimidation? In their search for answers, the hosts uncovered a startling revelation. One of their own, a trusted member of the team, had a connection to the bookstore's past. The team member's father had once been a close associate of Victor Blackwood, the bookstore's original owner. The revelation cast doubt on the team's objectivity and raised questions about hidden agendas. Could this connection have influenced their investigation? Were they being manipulated from within? As the walls seemed to close in, the team realized they were up against more than just a missing person case. They were entangled in a web of deceit, betrayal, and danger. The stakes had never been higher. And with each new discovery, they were drawn deeper into a mystery that threatened to consume them all. But the most chilling twist was yet to come. While reviewing the hidden security footage, the team noticed something that had previously gone unnoticed. In the background of one of the frames, a shadowy figure could be seen entering the bookstore just moments before Emily did. The figure was wearing a hood, obscuring their face, and moved with deliberate purpose. Who was this person? And what was their connection to Emily's disappearance? The discovery raised more questions than answers. Was this figure an accomplice? A witness? Or someone with a far more sinister role? The team was no closer to the truth than they had been at the beginning. But one thing was certain, the mystery of Emily Carter's disappearance was far from over. And the deeper they dug, the more dangerous the path became. As the podcast series neared its conclusion, the hosts promised their listeners that they would uncover the truth. But with each passing day, the odds seemed to stack higher against them. The walls were closing in, and the answers they sought remained just out of reach. Would they be able to solve the mystery before it was too late? Or would the secrets of Whispers of the Past remain hidden forever? The final episode loomed, and with it, the promise of answers. But as the team prepared to confront the truth, they couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching them. The mystery had become a game of cat and mouse, and the stakes had never been higher. The question remained, who would come out on top? The truth seekers or the ones determined to keep the past buried? Just when the team thought they were closing in on something that might finally bring clarity to Emily Carter's disappearance, a second thread began to unravel, one that threw the entire investigation into chaos and made the truth feel even more elusive. It started with a phone call late one night to Laura Whitmore, Emily's best friend and one of the last people to see her before she vanished. Laura hadn't been involved in the podcast directly, but she had supported it from the sidelines, occasionally providing background and old messages Emily had sent. This time, though, what she received was something far darker. The voice on the line was distorted, synthetic, and emotionless. It said only, "She knew too much. You're next if you keep talking." Then it cut off. No number, no trace, just static and silence. Laura, visibly shaken, contacted the podcast team the next morning and told them everything. But what troubled the hosts the most wasn't just the threat itself, it was the detail. The caller had used the exact phrasing Emily had once written in her journal weeks before she vanished. A sentence nobody outside her immediate circle should have ever known. The team scrambled to confirm how that information had leaked, combing through files, audio logs, and transcripts to see if they had accidentally shared that entry in one of their episodes. They hadn't. That phrase had never aired. The realization chilled everyone involved. It meant someone with intimate knowledge of Emily's thoughts, her writing, and her final days was either listening closely or had been close to her all along. Theories began to splinter in every direction. Was it someone from her school? A member of her family? Or had someone involved in the case from the start been playing a double game, manipulating the narrative from within? As if that wasn't enough to derail the investigation, an old photograph surfaced, anonymously emailed to the podcast team. It showed Emily at the bookstore 2 weeks before her disappearance, smiling, holding a book titled The Hollow Doorway, a rare and out-of-print novel believed to be fiction. But tucked into the corner of the photo, barely visible at first glance, was something far more disturbing. Behind Emily, reflected in the glass of a display case, was the same hooded figure captured in the recovered security tape, the one seen entering the store just before she vanished. Only this time, the figure wasn't blurred or passing through. He, or it, was standing still, watching her. The timestamp matched the date perfectly, making it undeniable that the photo was authentic. But the book Emily held. That title didn't exist in any online archive, bookstore registry, or publishing record. It was as if it had been made up, or worse, planted. The team's research into the mysterious novel led them to a retired professor of folklore and local history who had once written an unpublished manuscript on urban legends in the region. One chapter referenced a self-published booklet by Victor Blackwood, the original owner of Whispers of the Past, who had written under a pseudonym and printed only a handful of copies. That booklet, the professor claimed, was called The Hollow Doorway, and it was rumored to be based on real events, a chilling account of a hidden room behind a bookstore wall where the lost were taken to be forgotten. No one had seen a copy in decades. Until now. Suddenly, the case no longer felt grounded in just criminal activity, it had threads tying it to something older, stranger, and far harder to explain. Was Victor Blackwood simply a failed writer with a flair for the dramatic? Or had he documented something real, something buried that Emily had rediscovered and paid the price for? The questions tore through the team's confidence, and worse, they started to fear that the story they had been telling was incomplete or manipulated. What if the very evidence they had found had been placed to lead them down a specific path? What if Mr. Finch, the shady current owner, wasn't the mastermind behind this, but just another pawn in something much deeper? Complicating things even more, the team member with a personal connection to Victor Blackwood, Brian, the sound engineer who had stayed mostly out of the spotlight, began acting strangely. He started missing meetings, became withdrawn, and once was caught deleting archived files from the audio logs. When confronted, he claimed he had been trying to protect the team from going down a path that would get someone killed. His vague warnings and erratic behavior forced the rest of the crew to question everything he'd contributed. Had he been intentionally steering them away from certain leads? Was he trying to hide something or protect them from it? At this point, even the audience began to doubt what was real. The timeline no longer made perfect sense. Pieces of Emily's life that had felt solid began to dissolve under scrutiny. A teacher who'd claimed she hadn't seen Emily that day was now found to have been at the bookstore an hour before she went missing, captured in the newly recovered footage. A classmate who insisted Emily hadn't been in touch recently was exposed by phone records showing late-night texts just days before the disappearance. These inconsistencies weren't just cracks in the foundation of the case, they were fractures threatening to collapse everything the podcast had built. Then, just as the team prepared to release their next episode, another key piece of evidence disappeared. The original security tape, the one hidden behind the wall, the one that started it all, was gone. Stolen from a locked case in the podcast office with no sign of forced entry. Surveillance footage showed no break-in, and only 4 people had access to the room. Everyone denied touching it. The missing tape didn't just slow them down, it threw the entire investigation into question. Without it, they couldn't verify the shadowy figure's movement, the timeline, or even prove that Emily had ever made it to the store that day. 12 hours. And dropping. Nothing made sense anymore. The question wasn't just what had happened to Emily. It was who was really telling the story. The countdown loomed over Rachel like a ticking time bomb. 12 hours. The numbers on the screen burned into her mind as she stared at the live feed of the bookstore, the grainy image of the shadowed room where the chalk message had appeared. It was so eerily quiet. The calm before the storm. But Rachel could feel the storm building in her chest, her heartbeat thudding in her ears, her every nerve screaming that she needed to act. She wasn't just being watched now, she was being hunted. Panic clawed at her, but she pushed it aside. She had no time for fear. No time for doubt. She reached for her phone, her hands shaking as she dialed Laura's number again. No answer. For the 100th time. Her voicemail was full. She'd tried every avenue, every contact she had left, and it was all leading her into a black hole of silence. Even Anthony, who had been one of the last to talk to Brian before he vanished, had gone dark. It was like they were all disappearing, one by one, and Rachel was left standing at the center of something massive, something she couldn't yet comprehend but felt closing in on her from all sides. The door to her motel room suddenly creaked open. Her breath caught in her throat, but before she could move, the light flickered, casting sharp shadows against the walls. She spun around, every muscle tensed, eyes darting to the source of the noise. But there was no one. Just the dull hum of the neon lights from outside. She had locked the door. She knew she had locked the door. For a moment, it felt like everything was slipping away. The reality of the situation was too much to take in. The game they were part of was so far beyond what they had believed. Emily wasn't the first person to be dragged into it. She was just the one who had uncovered the truth. Rachel wasn't just chasing a missing person, she was a pawn in a much bigger, darker scheme. The worst part. The person who could help her now was the one person she never thought would turn on her. Brian's absence wasn't a random disappearance, it was a disposal. Rachel had been playing into the hands of someone she thought she trusted. But that trust, now, felt like a trap. She turned back to the footage on the screen, her mind racing as everything began to connect in a way that made her stomach churn. She hadn't wanted to believe it at first, but now it was undeniable. Anthony. He had been so eager to drive the narrative in the beginning. He'd fed her theories, ideas, conspiracies that made the whole case seem connected. But all along, he had known more than he let on. He was too involved. Too calm. Too quick to push her down paths that never led anywhere. What if he wasn't just a skeptical journalist? What if he had been the architect of the chaos all along? Rachel's gut twisted as she scrolled through old emails, texts, and private messages between them all. They were all in it together. Anthony, Laura, even Brian. Every piece of the puzzle started to fall into place. The odd messages. The unexplained disappearances. The subtle steering of their investigation. Every breadcrumb had been carefully laid out. Rachel was never meant to discover the truth. She had been chosen. Handpicked, in fact, to do exactly what she had done. Dig. Investigate. But just far enough to get caught in the net. Her phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. With a shaky breath, she answered. Rachel, a voice said, and she froze. It wasn't Brian. It wasn't Laura. It wasn't anyone she knew. We're watching you. You're running out of time. The voice was distorted, electronically altered to hide any trace of identity, but there was something in its tone that sent a chill down her spine. Whoever it was, they knew everything. The voice on the other end was calm, cold, devoid of any emotion. She tried to speak but couldn't find her voice. All she could do was listen as the voice continued. You think you're the only one searching for the truth. You think you're the only one who wants to expose this. You've been played from the beginning. You're not even part of the story anymore. You're a test. A cold sweat broke out across her skin, her mind spinning. A test. The line went dead, and Rachel was left alone, her breath shallow, her body trembling. The weight of everything hit her all at once. Her phone slipped from her fingers and clattered to the floor as the realization settled like ice in her veins. This wasn't about Emily. It was about control. About making them all question what was real. Who was real? The bookstore was just one piece of a much larger, far-reaching conspiracy. Whoever was behind this, they weren't just manipulating the investigation, they were manipulating her, and everyone who came near it. They had seen her as a pawn from the start. A tool to complete a narrative, a test subject in an experiment she never agreed to. The urgency was unbearable now. Rachel wasn't just running out of time. She was running out of options. They were closing in. The countdown continued. She had no choice but to confront Anthony. She had to get answers. But when she called him, his phone went straight to voicemail. And that's when it hit her, he was here. He'd been here all along, watching, guiding, waiting for the right moment to let everything collapse. The door to her room slammed open. A figure stepped inside, silhouetted by the hallway light. "I'm sorry, Rachel." Anthony's voice was barely a whisper. He looked almost sad. Almost regretful. But Rachel didn't believe him. She couldn't. "Not anymore. I didn't want this to happen," he said, his tone soft, almost apologetic, as if he were talking to an old friend. "But you should have known, you were never meant to find the truth. Not this way. Not now." Rachel's heart pounded in her chest as she slowly backed away, her mind racing for a way out. But she knew there was no escaping this now. No matter what she did, she was a part of this story and she was never going to get out. The pieces had all led here, and now everything she'd feared had come to pass. The very people she trusted had been playing a game, and Rachel was the final piece they needed to complete it. And as the door clicked shut behind her, she realized with a terrifying clarity, she had been the test subject all along. "You said." The air in the room felt thick with tension as Rachel's eyes locked on Anthony. His expression was unreadable, like a mask worn for too long, but there was something in his stance, something in his eyes, that betrayed the lie. She had been too close to the truth, and now she was the target. The walls felt like they were closing in, the flickering neon outside casting shadows that seemed to stretch longer with every passing second. Her pulse thundered in her ears, but there was no turning back now. She had come too far to stop, no matter how much her mind screamed at her to run. She had to confront this. She had to understand why everything had been a lie. "Anthony," she said, her voice trembling but steady, the words breaking the silence. The final days after everything unraveled felt like a blur, as if Rachel had woken from a nightmare but couldn't quite shake the sensation of the shadows still following her. The world around her hadn't changed, but she had. In the aftermath of that last confrontation, after everything that had been exposed, it seemed like there should be a clear resolution, a sense of finality to all the chaos and betrayal. But there was none. Instead, she was left in a silence that felt more oppressive than any revelation could have been. She had no one left to turn to. Everyone she had trusted was either complicit in the twisted narrative or lost to it. Anthony and Laura had vanished, slipping away into the shadows as if they had never existed at all, their presence replaced by echoes of a conspiracy too vast to comprehend in its entirety. Rachel didn't know where they went or why they disappeared, but the chill that ran through her every time she thought of them made her question whether it even mattered. They had played their parts, and the story was over, at least for them. But for Rachel, it was only the beginning. The podcast episodes, once a source of pride and validation, were now a cruel reminder of her own vulnerability. She deleted every last one. Every recording. Every bit of footage. But even as the digital traces of the story disappeared, the questions lingered in her mind like a persistent itch she couldn't scratch. Was the entire experience a lie? Had she been nothing more than a character in a scripted drama meant to test the limits of fear, obsession, and trust? The more she thought about it, the more she realized that the answer wasn't simple. The lines between truth and fiction had been so blurred that the story itself had become something different, something larger than herself. She had become part of the narrative, not because she sought it, but because the system had chosen her, had molded her into the protagonist of a story that was never meant to be solved. In some ways, she had learned the hardest truth of all. Sometimes, the story isn't meant to have an ending. Still, there was something that gnawed at her. Something unsettled. She had learned too much to simply walk away, but the world she had uncovered was far bigger than she ever realized. The truth of Emily's disappearance, the cryptic messages, the hidden surveillance, the audience that was always watching, it all pointed to a machine so vast, so insidious, that Rachel felt small in comparison. But the deeper she dug, the more she came to understand that the real mystery wasn't Emily, or even Brian's tragic fate, but the fact that they had all been so willing to believe in the story. To believe in the narrative. To trust that there was something out there to find. In a way, that was what they had all been searching for, something to believe in. And when they had finally found it, they were lost. Lost in the web of manipulation, lost in the need to make sense of a world that no longer made sense. Rachel looked out the window of her apartment one final time, the city below her humming with life, unaware of the hidden layers of darkness she had uncovered. There were still pieces of the puzzle she couldn't quite fit together. She had the sense that some part of the story, some crucial piece, was still missing. She couldn't shake the feeling that Emily was out there, still watching, still playing her part in this unending game. And in the back of her mind, a small voice whispered that this wasn't over. Not for Rachel. Not for anyone who had ever been touched by the story. A knock at her door snapped her out of her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment before walking slowly toward it, her breath catching in her throat. For a brief, wild moment, she thought it might be Anthony or Laura, returning to finish what they had started. But when she opened the door, there was nothing there, just a small package resting on the ground. No note. No sender. Just a plain brown box. She felt her heart race, and instinctively, her fingers brushed the box open. Inside, there was a single flash drive. Her hands trembled as she inserted the drive into her laptop. A file appeared, labeled Final_EPI. With a deep breath, she clicked it open. The video that played was distorted at first, the screen flickering and glitching. But soon, the image cleared, revealing a familiar face, Emily. She wasn't gone. She hadn't disappeared. She had chosen to leave, to become a part of something larger than herself. A part of the experiment. The video was her message to Rachel, a confession, a final chapter in the story that Rachel hadn't been prepared to hear. Rachel, Emily's voice came through, shaky but clear. I'm sorry. You were never supposed to be caught in this. But now, you are. And so am I. We've become pieces of something much bigger. Something that doesn't end. I wish I could say it's over, that we've figured it out. But the truth is, we've only uncovered a small part of it. We're just part of the story. A story that's still unfolding. It's not finished, and neither are we. As the video ended, the screen went black. Rachel sat there, staring at the empty screen, her thoughts racing. This wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. Emily had known it all along. And now, Rachel did too. They weren't the first. And they wouldn't be the last. In that moment, Rachel realized that her journey, their journey, wasn't just about solving a mystery. It was about understanding that some stories never end. Some narratives don't have neat conclusions. They loop. They stretch across time and space, influencing lives, changing them, shaping them in ways no one could predict. The story of the bookstore, the podcast, Emily, Brian, Anthony, and Laura, it wasn't over. It was just a chapter. The real question now wasn't what happened to Emily or what Anthony had done. It was, who else was watching? As Rachel closed her laptop and sat in the quiet of her apartment, the weight of the unknown pressed down on her. The story was still being written. And she, like so many others, would never really know how it would end. But one thing was certain, she would never forget what she had learned. And maybe, just maybe, the next chapter would be hers to write. The screen went dark.